Hi folks, welcome to Chapter 1 of your Compensation Management course, Roadmap to Effective Compensation. Now, what are some of the learning objectives that we have in this chapter? First of all, we want to be able to describe the purpose of a compensation system and why an effective compensation system is important to organizations. Then we want to start looking more at a reward system and distinguishing between extrinsic and intrinsic rewards, and as well distinguish between a reward and a compensation system. We also want to define what a reward strategy is and identify two key aspects of a compensation system. We want to identify and explain some of the key criteria for evaluating whether or not the compensation system you have in place as an organization is effective or successful. And we want to describe the steps to create an effective compensation system. So let's begin. Let's look at what compensation really is, or what it consists of. Well, first of all, it concerns your own financial return, so how much money you're getting. It will also include tangible services, things like employment or employee assistance programs, vacation programs, those kinds of things, benefits, healthcare benefits, and those are all the things that you'll receive as part of your employment. And I should say within those benefits, we're also looking at your pension. So that's what compensation really consists of. It's more of the hard core things that you're getting as a result of being an employee. Let's look at its purpose now. What's the purpose of compensation? Well, first of all, we want to get our members to do what we want them to do, what the organization wants them to do. So we want to make sure first and foremost that compensation system is motivating. So it has to be motivating in order to get people to do what it is you want them to do. And that's a problem in a lot of organizations. How do they formulate a compensation system that's motivating to people so that they achieve the end game, what the organization wants? So compensation is normally part of that solution because it needs to be motivating. If we look again at the purpose of a system and a compensation system from a larger perspective, we want to make sure that it creates a willingness among qualified persons to join an organization and to perform the tasks of an organization. So here's the critical pieces here. It has to create a willingness for people to join you. So again, your compensation system has to help the recruitment folks, right? Because people can't recruit effectively if you're not paying enough money, if your healthcare benefits aren't competitive, if your vacation plans aren't competitive. So it's really a key tool to helping recruitment people do their jobs, right? So employees have to perceive that accepting a job with you is going to make them better off personally, professionally, and financially, right? And you have to make sure that whatever you're going to provide helps those people meet their basic needs for security in your organization, provides for them a necessary degree of social interaction amongst their peers, gives them some kind of status within your organization, even if it's a status that says, hey, my job is important to this organization. People feel that they can achieve in your organization, so their achievements go noticed, so they're recognized, and there's an opportunity for them to experience some growth and development career-wise, challenge-wise, and job-wise. So they don't want to be bored in their job, they want to be learning, right? So compensation systems have to reward people who want to grow, develop, and learn. So those are really important to making that compensation system motivating. So let's consider whether or not your compensation system is an asset or a liability. Well, that's an interesting question, because 40 to 70% of the operating budgets that a company has is really what they pay out in compensation. That would be in healthcare benefits, pay for performance systems, base pay, even pensions, those kinds of things. And it's the single largest operating expenditure that a company is going to have. Statistics Canada tells us that in Canada, employers spend over $800 billion on wages and salaries in a year, and another 100 billion just on benefits. So in wages and salaries, we'd be looking at incentive compensation as well. So whether or not your company considers the compensation system to be an asset or a liability is going to depend on whether or not they're getting any return for the money that they're spending, for the money that they're budgeting, right? So they have to make sure that they're getting a return on that that's greater than what they're spending. So it would be an asset then. If they're not getting enough return, or if the returns are less than what they're spending, that's going to be a liability to them. So they're going to have to start cutting compensation or finding people who will perform to the level that they need to in order to get the returns that they need. So let's now define a reward. So we oftentimes say that a compensation system is a subset of a reward system, because a reward system is really anything that a company provides to its workers, or the job itself that satisfies an employee need. So we don't want to say that the only thing that satisfies an employee needs are extrinsic rewards, which would be those that satisfy your survival, security, social, and just your recognition needs. And these would primarily be things like your base pay, your employee benefits, your pension, and any incentive pay, right? We're not just looking at those as being a reward. A reward that a company offers to you should be inherent in the job itself. So it's really important that the company construct jobs that are intrinsically motivating to people that speak to them. You know, some people will say, well, I may be a lab tech in a hospital, right? Maybe I feel good about what I do. I find out what's wrong with people. I have a role to play in that, in helping people get better, because I determine what's wrong in their health generally, and hopefully a doctor's able to communicate and find things that will help patients. But that's because of what I find in my job. So people need to find those jobs that are intrinsically motivating to them and speak to them, right? So just the job itself could be motivating, and that could be part of what the organization stands for, what they value. But the other piece is it has to be the reward has to be extrinsic as well. So it's anything really that's provided by a company or the job itself that satisfies an employee need, whether that need is extrinsic or intrinsic. And don't forget, people have extrinsic and intrinsic needs. They want their jobs to be inherently motivating, and they also want to make sure that that job at a minimum satisfies their basic needs. So when we look at rewards versus incentives, what's the difference? How are they similar? All right. To be honest, the difference between rewards and incentives is really starting to dwindle a little bit in many organizations, so it can be quite blurred. But a reward in and of itself is recognizing valued employee behaviors, whereas an incentive is supposed to induce a valued employee behavior. So let's think about that. It says here, rewards are positive consequences of performing desired behaviors. So in other words, say for example, you are in an organization, and you get a pay increase at the end of the year. So you're getting that pay increase subsequent to performing the behaviors of the job, right? So in other words, you're getting your pay increase at the end of the year or at the end of a quarter, right? So you have to perform before you know how big the reward's going to be. All right? So most of the time you'll get it at the end, or maybe during the quarter, right? So as you're performing, you get recognized, you get paid, you get your pay increase. So your pay increases could be quarterly, they could be semi-annually, they could be annually. But your performance is really determining the size of the reward, what you're going to get. Whereas an incentive is a promise up front that specifies how much of a reward you're going to get. So they say, well, if you increase your sales by $50,000, you're going to get 10% of that. So you already know you're going to get $5,000. All you have to do is increase sales $50,000. But you may not necessarily know in a reward what you're going to get until after you perform. So they're not exactly the same, right? But what we tended to find over time is that if rewards are used consistently to recognize employee performance, then they do become expected. So we find usually that rewards sometimes become implied promises for performing. So that's why some companies think of them a little bit as an incentive. And that's why I said earlier that sometimes the difference can be kind of blurred. So if you think of it that way, say for example, a company is giving you a pay increase year after year or quarter after quarter because you're performing, you would say, well, once I know what I have to do and I do a good job, then I would expect to continue to get that 3% pay increase. So it's not really a surprise. It's kind of something that you know you're going to get if you perform. And in that sense, that's where a reward can sometimes be seen as an incentive in that sense. So the differences or the differentiation between the two is becoming kind of blurred over time. Now, if you look at a reward system and a compensation system, all right, you look at a compensation system as being having three elements: base pay, which is your base pay, which you're earning now; performance pay, or some kind of an incentive you're getting; and your indirect pay, which includes your pensions, your health care benefits like your medical and your dental. This is a subset. This thing here is largely a subset of the reward system, because these three things here are primarily extrinsic elements to the reward system. The intrinsic ones are the things that give you pleasure and joy about working for that fabulous company, or things about the job that you just love to do. So a compensation system is more of the hardcore compensation. But a reward system is really only including one piece, okay, of that. So the compensation system really looks at the extrinsic rewards of the reward system, but there's also an intrinsic piece. So if we look at a compensation strategy, the compensation strategy basically has two major elements. It has direct compensation, which is your hardcore stuff, which is your base pay, your merit pay, any incentives you get, that's your performance pay, as well as the cost of living adjustment, right? But it also includes the indirect pay, which is pay for time not worked. That would be like your vacation programs, protection programs. That would be like your healthcare benefits, your medical, your dental, your long-term disability. It would also be your retirement, your pension, and employee services, things like employee counseling programs, those kinds of things. Say, for example, you work for a retailer. Maybe you get, 10% off clothing. You work at maybe Fortino's or one of those stores. Employees may get, a discount on their lunch or their dinner, that they buy at Fortino. So those kinds of things would be considered to be services that they give employees. But both direct and indirect compensation are part of the compensation strategy. And don't forget, the compensation strategy itself is the plan that a company has for its mix of direct compensation and indirect compensation. So whatever the mix is, so how much base pay, how much incentive, am I going to give a cost of living adjustment, and what percentage of their total 100% compensation is direct going to be and indirect going to be. So is direct going to be 65% and indirect 35% of their compensation, and of that 35%, how much is going to be vacation, how much is going to be benefits, how much is going to be employee services. So when we think of strategy, we think of the plan for the mix. So what's the company planning on doing? And a lot of times that plan is driven based on how much they can afford, right? And because it has to be cost effective. I have to make sure I'm going to be able to derive a benefit from the employee behaviors and performance for what I'm spending, but I also have to make sure it's affordable for me to do. So again, we've already talked a little bit about the three main components when we looked at this slide here. We talked about the main components, but let's look at them in a little more detail. Base pay is the foundation. So when you sign on to work for a company, you know how much money you're getting every month, every 2 weeks, every week, however often you're paid. Your performance pay is really related to something over and above the base pay. It's usually going to relate to more of your merit pay. So say, for example, at the end of the year, you might get a 3% pay increase. Maybe you're going to get paid based on which year, say you're a salesperson. Maybe you don't get a big base pay at all. Maybe you get no base pay. Maybe only 20% of your pay is base pay. Maybe the other 80% is performance pay based on how much you sell, right? And indirect pay, again, is going to include things like your medical, your dental, your pension, those kinds of things, all right? Non-cash items that satisfy your other needs. So, what are some of the key aspects, or the two key aspects of a compensation strategy? All right, don't forget the strategy is the plan for the mix of those direct and indirect compensation elements. So, two key aspects are, number one, what's the mix of those three components going to be? These three components. So, what's the mix of indirect pay, pay for performance, and base pay? What's the mix? And then, how am I going to pay it out? So how should the compensation be paid? Is it going to be paid? I know my base pay might be paid monthly, every other week, every week. So how often am I going to pay? And how much am I going to pay? So when I'm thinking of, my compensation strategy, I not only have to think of the mix, how much base pay you're going to get versus performance versus indirect, but I also have to think about how frequently I'm going to pay you, right? And how much I'm going to pay you. So what should it be? So we have to think a lot about, how much compensation should be paid. When we think about, how much we're paying other jobs internally vis-a-vis yours. So how much are we paying HR generalists as opposed to accountants, as opposed to sales reps? We want to make sure that internally there's equity, but we also have to look at what our competition is doing. I don't want to have to find out that I'm losing really good salespeople to my competition because I'm not paying them enough. So how much I should pay them, I have to look internally but also externally. So my strategy has to take into account, how I'm going to determine how much I should be paying people. My reward strategy. Well, again, we said that a compensation system is a subset of a reward system. The compensation strategy is also a subset of the reward strategy, because the reward strategy is really the plan for the mix of intrinsic and extrinsic rewards. And it also addresses how will they be provided and when will they be provided. So I need to know what the overall mix of extrinsic and intrinsic is going to be, right? So I need to make sure that I develop jobs, or I have jobs that are meaningful for people, that they're going to love to do. A lot of that has to do with recruiting the right kind of people to do those jobs. But again, your compensation system has to be motivating so that people want to come and work for you, right? So I really have to think long and hard about the reward strategy itself. So what's my plan for the mix of extrinsic and intrinsic rewards before I can really even develop my compensation system? So if I now look at what the goals of my reward and my compensation systems need to be, it has to first and foremost promote the achievement of the organization's goals. So I can't be giving employees everything they want as an HR professional and not meeting the needs of my company, because my company is going to want to see a payback on what I'm paying people. Because if it's not resulting in increased sales, increasing earnings per share, increasing revenues, increasing dividends to shareholders, then it's not doing what the organization needs it to do. The reward and compensation systems also need to fit with and support the organization's strategy and structure. So in other words, if the organization needs to increase its sales by 25%, then I need to make sure that my compensation system is going to deliver that result, or has a strong role to play in delivering that result. We already said that it has to be able to attract and retain qualified employees, so, to recruit and to be able to select and make an honest, competitive job offer to people. My compensation system has to deliver there. It has to motivate my employees to behave in a way that helps me achieve my strategy and my organizational goals. It also has to be equitable, and we already said just previously, internal equity as well as external equity. It has to comply with the law, so I can't be offering people any lesser compensation than the law allows me. What do I mean by the law? Well, we got minimum wage laws. We've got, laws in employment law that even tell us how much we have to pay in terms of overtime pay, those kinds of things. I have to make sure that I abide by health and safety standards to make sure the working conditions in my organization are appropriate. That's got to do with making sure that I'm looking after my employees. I have to also make sure that whatever I'm paying out in terms of compensation is within the financial means of the organization, so the organization can afford it, right? And it achieves the above goals in a manner that's cost effective. So I'm working within my budget, right? Whatever I budgeted for compensation, I have to be able to stick to and meet that budget. Now, this roadmap to effective compensation slide here is taken from your text, but really it gives you a nice division of what's in the text. So it kind of lays the groundwork for everything that we're going to talk about in this course. The only element that we will not be dealing with in our course is this last step, which looks at maintaining an effective compensation system. Our course deals primarily with the first 4 steps. All right? Understanding your organization and your people and the impact that's going to have on your compensation system, formulating your compensation and your reward strategy, determining compensation values, which has to do more with job evaluation, and designing your incentive pay systems, which is dealing with performance pay, as well as your indirect pay, which deals with your healthcare plans and your pension plans. So let's talk a little bit more about what these first 4 steps encompass. So if we look at step 1, which is going to be, here they've said the first 3 chapters of the textbook, we're going to focus on understanding the context within which a company operates. So that really is going to look more at a company's competitive environment. So what are my competitors paying, right? What's happening globally, from a competitive perspective. So I might turn around and say, well, I'm experiencing in my industry a lot of offshore competition. So, maybe, Japan, China, other countries are providing products that are very and offering them in a very cost effective way. So what kinds of things do I have to do? Maybe I can't compete, and make my product delivered as cost effective because here in the country or in the province that I'm operating, I have minimum wage laws that I have to abide by, whereas other countries may not have those kinds of laws, those health and safety requirements. So, I have to make sure that I'm providing these things. I'm here in Canada or in particular provinces that have different rules I have to abide by. But I can still make my compensation system effective if I consider some of those intrinsic things that make my job motivating for people to do. So I have to consider those kinds of things. So what are those intrinsic factors that make jobs motivating? We're going to talk about those in step 1 or over the first 3 chapters. I also have to look at the quality of my leadership in an organization and managerial style, and think about what kind of an impact that has on jobs intrinsically. Do my employees, do my supervisors and my managers know how to deliver effective performance appraisals and keep people motivated and on task? Those kinds of things we're going to talk about in step 1. We're also going to determine in step 2. Step 2 is going to look at what are the components of the compensation strategy, some of my pay for performance choices, and formulating the strategy. So I'm going to look at the mix of base pay, performance pay, and indirect pay. And how do I have to mix and match those 3 components in order to make a compensation system an extrinsic compensation system that's going to be motivating for people. In step 3, this is where I start to looking at the actual dollar value for jobs and individual employees within my organization. So I have to now start focusing on internal equity as well as external equity. So I now have to look at the role that job evaluation is going to play internal to my company in order to help me establish pay rates and pay ranges. So I might have a job that is evaluated at a particular level in my organization, and that means, or that's going to have an impact on how much I'm going to pay it, right? But that's internal equity. I also have to look at externally, what are or other organizations in my same geographic area or my competitors, what are they paying for those same jobs that I have in my organization? So I have to be able to balance internal as well as external equity. And I also have to be able to manage the performance appraisal system, because it's also going to have a role in how much I pay my people. In the fourth step, I'm going to look here at my incentive pay. So maybe gain sharing programs, profit sharing programs. What am I going to do here to make sure that I'm paying my people equitably, helping them maybe share in some of the profits of the company? But I also have to look here at the quality of the healthcare programs, my pension plans, whether I have a defined benefit or a defined contribution plan. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different pension plan options that are available to employers to help keep the compensation system motivating for employees and still cost effective for employers. So we're going to look at that a little bit. And as I said, we're not really going to look at step 5 too much, but it should be noted and it should be understood that we also, every year, we have to look at whether or not our compensation system, how much it helped us achieve the results, the financial results that the company needed. And if it wasn't as effective as we wanted it to be, we have to maybe review it. So we have to control, we may have to rebudget, we may have to rejig it a bit. So we have to think about that too. We don't deal with that in our course, but it is something we have to consider. We have to revisit and make sure that it maintains its cost competitiveness as well as achieves the organizational goals and helps the employee achieve their goals. Make sure that before you go on to week 2, that you check what's due this week and what's due next week in your course. Make sure you plan. You know what's going on not just next week, but you may even want to take a peek into the following week and see what's due there, just to make sure that you're managing your time well, you're getting all your coursework done. You know when your discussion board postings are due, you do have a group assignment, you are going to have to do your reading on a regular basis. Is a quiz due? Make sure you know what's coming up, what's due in the course. And of course, make sure you take time to relax and have a super week.